I'm Keltie Maguire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Today, I am joined by no guest. It's just me that you get to hear from because we are doing our wrap-ups from season 2. Yes, this last series of interviews, we had 16 different conversations, have come to a close. We are going to be bringing you brand new conversations starting on the 11th of September. But today, I thought we would do what we did at the end of season 1, which is I would share some of the top takeaways and reflections from these conversations that I had. Things that I thought were especially noteworthy, that really stood out. And of course, I want to urge you to go listen to all 16 of the previous conversations if you've not already done so, because there really just is so much wisdom, so much insight. There's really a lot to be gleaned from all of our different guests. But I thought I would do sort of a top level summary and share some of the key points that really stood out to me in hopes that they will help you on your own journey. So let's get into it. Before we do so, I just want to let you know we will be back in a couple of weeks' time. So we'll be bringing you brand new conversations for season 3. And I want to thank all of you who've reached out to share different ideas in terms of the types of guests and stories that you would like to hear in this season and in upcoming conversations. Now, for those of you, and I've had a couple people say, are you running out of ideas in terms of what to talk about, who to talk to? And the answer is a very much no. There are so many different perspectives and experiences that I want to share with you. And so if you're listening to these conversations and you're not hearing something that you feel like really, let's say, resonates with your own experience, or you're thinking, oh, I'd love to hear from someone with this background or somebody who's grappling with this, I want you to know that my email inbox as well as my DMs on Instagram are always open. I always welcome your input. And I want you to know that I truly take every one of your suggestions. I note it down. I try and be, I guess, a little bit methodical is maybe not the right word, but try and have an effort to balance different voices, different perspectives, different backgrounds. You probably have picked up through these conversations that I do my very best to alternate between hearing from a parent as well as somebody who's chosen the Childfree Path. So trying to make an effort to balance it all out. Trust that if you've made a request, there's a good chance you're going to be hearing from that perspective, but it just might take a little bit of time for us to get there with a conversation a week and so many different perspectives to share. All right, so let's get into season 2's top takeaways. This is for episodes 16 through 30. What do I want to share with you all? Well, we actually kicked off season 2 with Dr. Jane Van Dis. And this conversation was, I think, for a lot of us, kind of confronting because we talked a lot about the environment, climate change, reproductive justice. And of course, there are many things that we need to consider and probably feel concerned about when it comes to having a child and bringing it into this world. And one of the perspectives that we talked about was the fact that when we have a child, there's kind of, broadly speaking, 2 main ways in which we think about the impact on the environment or on our planet as it relates to having a kid. And the first is that we think about what impact might our child have on the planet. And again, this may not be something that's crossed your mind, but I do hear from women sometimes that with the changes we're seeing with carbon emissions, with how much our environment is changing, with climate disasters, is it right for me to be bringing a child or children into this world when I think about the fact that they're also going to be having an impact on our planet, on our environment? So that's one direction we can think about, child onto environment. The other thing is environment onto child. And I feel like this is come sort of more to the forefront for a lot of us when we think about the fact that, do I want to bring a child into this world? What's it going to look like when we think about more and more climate disasters, climate change? I read the statistics yesterday that in terms of, I think, various continents or parts of the world, Europe, where I live, has actually warmed at something like twice the speed or temperature. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't be citing facts without the exact number, but relative to the rest of the planet, that Europe is heating up even faster. And I thought, ooh, interesting. So again, that's something that I have and hear about in a lot of the conversations that I have with you. Something that Jane brought to the table, again, this is in episode 16, was thinking about also how our environment and climate change is impacting our pregnancies and childbirth. And I got to say, this was a real insight for me because it's not something that I had really considered. Again, I thought about what what effect would a child have on the environment, and what effect would the environment have on a child. But I didn't think about what impact might climate change and fossil fuel emissions and all of these different chemicals that we have in our food and our skincare, et cetera, what might that have as far as impact, specifically negative impact, on our pregnancies and childbirth. So let's hear from Jane and a little bit about what she is seeing and hearing in her practice as an obstetrician gynecologist.
But I'm seeing, and my colleagues are seeing marked increases in complications of pregnancy. And I tell my patients that, this isn't your fault. My theory, and I've yet to be proven, although data is coming in small increments, my theory is that we are seeing a saturation of environmental toxins and air toxins that are affecting our bodies, such that otherwise young, healthy women are developing chronic diseases due to exposure to plastics. We saw that study that came out a couple of weeks ago showing 250,000 nanoparticles in 1 liter water, one plastic water bottle. We're seeing phthalates. Phthalates are chemicals put into plastics to make them soft and flexible. There was a study that came out a couple of weeks ago showing 1 in 10 preterm births is due to women's exposure to phthalates. Of course, we have the PFAS and PFOS, the forever chemicals as well, that we also know are having profound effects in increasing our risk for hypertension, diabetes, obesity. So one of the things about informed consent is that things are happening in our environment and in our relationship to our environment that are making us less healthy, and that means we have less healthy pregnancies. And women are really frustrated. They're crying. They're in tears that they get diagnosed with these things. And so part of informed consent about the decision to have a child, I think, is, are you okay if some of these things happen?
All right. So when it comes to making the actual kids or child-free decision, we heard some really great suggestions from people. And I was also able to draw some interesting parallels between conversations in terms of how people are actually making this decision. And one thing that came up in a few different conversations was the idea that we really need to try and get away from things sometimes when we're making a decision as large as the kids or child-free decision. And this isn't to say that we have to go, escape society, or we can't be around our partner if we're in a relationship, but it can actually be helpful to take some time away. Sometimes this is going to a different location. Sometimes this is just taking some quiet time with ourselves in a journal, or maybe meditating. And my conversation with writer, author, and artist Marloes de Vries in episode 17 spoke to this super beautifully, and just how important it was for her to get away at times and to really connect with her own wants, needs, and desires, where it concerned this child-free path that she had really felt an urging towards, but in some sense was having some trouble embracing.
And I just knew that I was overwhelmed. So I'm a really sensitive person, as we call it. A highly sensitive person is the official name. And that means that a lot of input gets really into me very quickly. So sensory stuff. But also how people feel. And people tend to project a lot of feelings onto other people. And I would take them to heart. And I thought I have to deal with all these thoughts that other people are having. And I was just so overwhelmed the first time. And I thought, I need to get away from this. I need some peace to myself. I need to find my own rhythm again. I need to find when I'm tired. I didn't even know when I was tired or when I was hungry, because I was so attuned to other people's needs that I completely forgot myself. And I also feel that if you're like that and you are sensitive, then it is really key to take some time to yourself, to realign yourself with your own basic needs and your feelings.
So as you hear Marloes describe here, really what we are trying to do when we're making the kids or child-free decision extends so much beyond the decision itself. It's about reconnecting, or for some of us, for the first time ever, connecting with our own needs, our own feelings, our own desires. And this is something that we do inside my group program, as well as my one-on-one coaching work. I, first and foremost, am trying to help you connect with your personal wants, needs, and desires, which, again, many of us have lost sight of due to the fact that we're trying to appease other people, that we have these external voices, whether it be family or partner or society. And when we're not accustomed to prioritizing what it is we want, or even recognizing what those things are, it can be really hard to do, especially when we're considering such a big decision like the kids or child-free choice. So my recommendation for you, if you're struggling right now, is I realize you want to make this kids or child-free decision, but as much as you can start to, on a day-to-day basis, recognize and identify how you're feeling, what it is you need, what your body's asking for, these little whims and desires that we have, whether it's, I'm thirsty, I want a glass of water, or, you know what, I think I'd really like to have dessert for dinner tonight. This is something you might hear me talk about sometimes, having ice cream for dinner. If we can learn to honor ourselves in these small ways, it's sort of like a muscle that gets built, and it can become easier over time to then listen to ourselves when it comes to making big decisions like the kids or child-free decision. Now, we also heard from my husband, Chris Hefele, in episode 20, which was a really fun and special episode for me to record. And I have to say, I found it really cool because I actually had a bunch of you reaching out saying that you listened with your own partner to this conversation between me and my husband, which I thought was super cool. Chris actually shared something with me in the episode that totally struck me by surprise. And that was, as I talk about the episode, Chris was very much happy to go either way, felt very 50-50 in terms of the kids or child-free choice, whereas I really was grappling to connect with what it was I wanted. And so he gave me a lot of space to make that decision, which again, in episode 20, you hear about some of that resentment it initially created, which now has really paved the way to having gratitude that I had that time and space to figure out what I wanted. But Chris shared a little something with me that I didn't know, which was about a getaway of his own to figure out what it was he wanted.
I had sort of like a solo getaway for a weekend. I think it was 2019 or something like that. That was sort of like where I took some time to, I guess, go through my mind and write things down, and how could life be without and with a kid, and sort of thought all that through for me, taking really time for myself, because I also said, like, you need to make the decision for you. And I was like, okay, I guess what would be my decision if I would actually be asked? And that was sort of I guess my review time, really, that I did then.
Now, again, this idea of getting away from it all to connect with yourself is something that came through in a bunch of different conversations. And we also heard from Alice Gretchen in episode 28. And she talked about that for her, it was actually when she was quarantining with COVID and really journaling through her feelings and decision, that she was able to finally come to some clear terms in terms of what it was she wanted. And for her, it was ultimately pursuing the Childfree Path. So I thought that was interesting, and actually specifically interesting because COVID is something that came up in a bunch of conversations. And it also came up with some of the parents that I talked to, that COVID was really a turning point for them in terms of connecting with what mattered, what was really important, and help them get clear on the fact that parenthood was in the future, and in the case of the guest we heard from, in the near future. So very interesting. Now, it did not escape my attention that when we talked about getting away, these solo retreats that Marlo's talked about and that my husband talked about, that Alice talked about quarantining with COVID, interestingly, these were all child-free people, or people who ultimately stayed child-free. So make of that what you will. I'm not going to draw any broad conclusions here because, again, we talked about just a moment ago that parents as well had some reflection time over COVID, and there were conversations that were happening around this desire for children. But I did think, okay, it's interesting. I'm curious over future conversations if I happen to hear more from those who ultimately chose child-free, that they've taken that time away, perhaps less so than those who've chosen parenthood. And why that might be, I don't know. Again, I'm not going to draw any broad conclusions here, but it did strike me as kind of interesting from the small sample size that we had here in season 2. Now, something else that came up when we talked about decision making and how this decision is made is a big theme that I noticed is so many people said what I like to say to all my clients, which is that you cannot think your way to a decision, that you have to actually feel your way there. And that isn't to say we shouldn't think about this decision at all. I'm not suggesting that we remove this sort of like analytical or intellectual component, because I think it's important that we weigh in certain factors and we think about how ready we are. And we think about, if we're prepared financially, or the status of our relationship, if we feel like we're in a supportive partnership, or that we have other means of support in our lives. So I'm not saying don't use your head at all, but if we just think that we can think and think and think and think and think, and eventually we're going to have the right information and make a decision, I think we're missing a huge part of it. In fact, I know we're missing a huge part of it, which is that we have to really also feel our way to a decision. We have to notice what's coming up in our bodies, coming up in our emotions. And this is something that we do inside the coaching work that I do with my clients, is help you connect and drop back into the body, or perhaps for the first time, connect with and honor what you're feeling, and use that as one more, let's say, part of the puzzle in order to help you get clearer on what it is you want. All right. So you might be wondering, okay, if I'm not supposed to solely think my way to a decision, if I want to incorporate how I feel in my body, in my emotions, how do I do that? Or what does it feel like to have made a decision or to feel confident in one choice or another? And I loved how Catherine Ripley, who is a somatic therapist and clinical social worker, how she described it. Now, Catherine is somebody who has not yet had children, but she feels very strongly that she would like to have children. And so I asked her, okay, what's that like? What does that feel like? So here we hear from Catherine Ripley. This is in episode 18 of the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. I'm curious for you, like, what does that knowing and certainty feel like in your body? And sort of the second part of that, what particular aspects of parenthood feel exciting? Like when you say, this is something I always knew I wanted or that I would like to have, what particular aspects of it excite you?
Yeah. I think the answers to the two questions are actually kind of similar, because I think I would say that, when I contact how it feels in my body, it feels like an excitement about the future. It feels like a sort of positive, energizing feeling about when I get to that point in my life where I do feel ready to have kids. I look forward to that. It's like I feel called forward to it.
And now on the flip side, from someone who has chosen the Childfree Path, do we want to hear from them in terms of how did that feel for them? What sort of experience did they have when they had a realization that child-free was for them? Well, let's hear from Alice Gretchen, who, again, we heard from in episode 28.
And in that moment, I just felt like, again, that release that I felt when I was in my early 20s of realizing I don't have to do this.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I don't want to do this. And it was different this time. It was different for me at 34 than it was at 24. At 24, it was, I don't have to. And at 34, it was, I don't want to. But the feeling in my body was the same. It was just like, oh, we don't have to do this. I don't want to do this.
Now, if you're wondering, how do I actually do this? Okay, maybe these are some clues in terms of how that emotion might feel. And of course, I want to encourage you to recognize that this is something that's going to be unique for all of us, and to not necessarily expect that you're going to feel exactly the same as Catherine did or the same way that Alice did. We actually got some really great tactics from Dr. Natasha Ghosh in episode 27 of the podcast. And she gave us a few different ways and even actually guided us through a couple of exercises that we can do to help better connect with our bodies and our emotions. And she talks about why this is so important in this clip you hear here.
So we spend a lot of time in our minds, and you'll see actually kids spend a lot of time in their bodies. You can see it when they're excited or when they're angry. You can even if you couldn't hear what they were saying, you can tell by what's going on in their body. And we have forgotten to listen to those parts of us. We tend to focus on our mind, rational thought. And I think that this is probably one of the challenges in this decision, which is, how do I logic my way into making this choice? And that doesn't always work, because you're working with your mind and your body and your emotions as well. I really like things like breath work. I like meditation. It allows us to deactivate the nervous system, that fight or flight system that can often cloud our thinking, because our body, as you're trying to make this choice in your mind, you're actually activating your fight or flight system, this survival system, because it feels like a life or death choice in this moment. And so when that happens, we have cortisol and adrenaline running through our body, and we're no longer thinking with our rational mind. We're thinking with that sort of survival part of us. And that's not where we want to be making that decision from. So if we can, through our breath, we're able to deactivate that system and we're kind of slow everything down, we're able to then listen to those inner voices a little more easily.
So something else that came up in a few of my conversations, and this was specifically something discussed with the child-free women who I spoke with in season 2, is this myth that is still prevalent amongst some people that you will want kids when you're with the right person. And this is, of course, grossly insulting to those people who have met a partner that they really love, they feel at home with, they feel connected to, and yet they don't feel desire for children. And, again, you maybe have heard this before, but sometimes people will say to you, if you're single, for example, oh, don't worry, you'll want kids when you meet the right person. And hey, I don't want to dismiss this. Some people are ambivalent. They meet someone, they see that that person could be a wonderful parent with them, that it's an experience they want to take on. Amazing. All the power to you. But the idea, especially if you're really firm and clear and not wanting kids, that you will change your mind when you meet someone else or someone new, again, it's quite insulting, especially to people who already have a partner, somebody they're really happy with. So we heard about this, first of all, in episode 22 with Shweta Ramkumar. She talks about a comment that she got from somebody about having not met the right person and the attitude that maybe she would have kids or want kids if she did.
One person I remember asking me at the time, what if you meet the right person and he wants kids? Mm-hmm. And my response was very simple. Then he's not the right person for me. Yeah. So she just could not get their head around that fact. And she was like, oh, that's what people do. They get married and have, once they when you meet someone, you get married and have children. And I told her, yeah, I know countless people who have not done that. They neither have got married and neither do they have children. And I've done exactly that now, And this conversation was 10 years ago, and that's what I'm at now. I have a partner. We live together, but we are never getting married, and we're not having children. And he also doesn't want children. So it was very, it all worked out for the best.
And we hear something super similar echoed by Marlos de Vries. Again, this was in episode 17, and she heard something really similar. And I love how she turns this around here, the idea that the right person she'll want kids with. Listen to what she has to say.
I had a friend that told me that if I would meet the right person, that I would want to be a parent. And at that time, I was already with my current partner. So I thought, so I should get rid of him, get a new one in, and see if I want to make babies. Wow. And I think a lot of people think that. So they tell you, if you meet the right person, then you will know. And that was what happened for me as well. I met the right person, and then I knew for sure that I didn't want to be a parent.
So what they say is true, just not in the way that they expect it to be, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so tell me more about that. So how did you know when you met your partner that then for sure this is going to be my path?
Well, when I met him, well, not when I met him, but when I got to know him a little bit better, I felt so at ease. I felt so at home with him. And I could be 100% myself. And if you can be yourself and be authentically you, however cheesy that may sound, but you settle into yourself and you are more in touch with your own emotions and with your feelings. And then I knew for sure, I don't want to do this. This is not the path for me. I just felt it. It's really, I think it's really hard to say. And I know people want practical solutions for this, but it was really a case of feeling.
And notice what she says there. It was really a case of feeling. There it is again, a feeling. So again, if you've been approaching this kids or child-free decision purely from a mental perspective, I want to really encourage you to spend some time noticing the emotions that come up in your body or any sensations or feelings you have in your body when you think about either having kids or being child-free. You don't have to draw any broad conclusions from this yet, but just start noticing if you can incorporate this aspect of yourself when you think about the kids or child-free choice. All right, let's talk about a really simple way that you can support the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. And that is to leave a rating or a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. So over on Spotify, you can only leave a rating. It literally takes about 10 seconds. Give us 5 stars. I will be forever grateful, and it will really help us get discovered by more listeners. Now, if you listen on Apple Podcasts and you'd like to share some kind words, you can also leave a rating over there. You can find this on your device if you have the Apple Podcast app. And again, both ways are great ways for us to get discovered by more listeners. Is a huge help. I, of course, can sing and shout from the rooftops about this podcast and why you should tune in, but it's always so helpful for people to hear from others who have been on the fence or who are on the fence and finding benefit from this podcast. So hit pause, take a minute, and leave a rating or a review, again, over on the Spotify app or Apple Podcasts. And to inspire you today, I'm going to share a few kind words from one of our recent reviews. This one was left by Berry Blonde 89 over on Apple Podcasts, who says, "Such a needed resource, 5 out of 5 stars. Honestly, I couldn't recommend this podcast enough. Those who have ever contended with this huge decision and sat in uncertainty know that it feels like a very lonely and scary place. I had no idea there were other women like myself who were so confused on this decision. Sitting in the gray area is a hard place to be, and Keltie brings an amazing variety of people who give their personal experience, whether that includes children or a life without them. Just truly, thank you." Well, thank you to you, Berry Blonde 89, as well as all of you who've already taken the time to leave a rating or review. I see all of the words that you leave on the podcast, on Apple Podcasts, as well as all of your ratings, and truly I'm grateful for each and every one of them. So again, hit pause, go leave a rating or review on your favorite streaming app, and we'll see you back here in just a second for the rest of this episode. All right, let's talk a little bit about those who've chose the parenting path. And something I hear from a number of women who are on the fence about kids is a lot of fear about having to, A, drastically change their life and their lifestyle should they choose to have children. And also the fact that the way they see kids being parented today to be super overwhelming, high pressure, etc. You know, I spend time online and I see, for example, and I understand some women find this really enjoyable, but I sometimes see moms packing up lunches and they've got, sandwiches that are cut out of themed cookie cutter shapes, depending on what season it is. And they have little notes in the lunch boxes. And that's just one small example, but it seems like it can be really high pressure, and especially for moms to be this perfect parent should you choose to have kids. And we got a couple of really beautiful reminders from some of our guests this season that, guess what? You get to choose what your parenting path looks like. Now, of course, there are certain things that we need to do when we have children as far as raising them in healthy and loving ways and making sure they get an education and helping them to become, self-supportive sort of adults. But we also get a choice. We don't have to subscribe to all of the narratives, all of the ways of doing things. And we have 3 fantastic guests who we hear from on this topic. The first of which is the first couple that we had onto the podcast, aside from myself and my husband, Chris. This was Colette and Scott Stoller in episode 25. Listen to what the two of them have to say.
And a lot of people, even, our world, or our work and our life just doesn't conform to society's norms. And so we have a kid, they think we have to go back to that normal way. And it's like, no, there's so many different ways and opportunities. I mean, now people with the internet and social media, you can see what people are doing so much easier. If you want to do a little research, you could take a year off and have your kid be educated in another country, where in the past that was literally so foreign and so it seems so hard to do. Now it's so easy to learn. There's Facebook groups or whatever. You start doing research, you find out, oh, here's hundreds of people that I can talk to personally, get their experience and take that risk. So I'm on a tangent, but
no, that's important. We're taught, I think, from such a young age that there's one way to live.
Yes.
And then luckily this information age with social media has opened up an entirely new world. Now we've always had books to access, but we get information so much quicker, and we can connect with these people via email or social media, where that never happened, 20 years ago. That would be impossible. So it's a whole new world. And I think it's amazing that we can see that there's other ways to live.
So I got to say, if you are travel lovers and adventure lovers, you are most definitely going to want to make sure that you tune into this conversation. That excerpt that I just shared from interview with Colette and Scott Stoller, because they have such a refreshing, beautiful, and adventurous perspective on having kids and having a continuation of the kind of beautiful adventure-fueled lifestyle that you are living today, if this applies to you. We also heard from New York Times bestselling author and parenting expert Julie Lythcott-Haims, who talks specifically about the topic of helicopter parenting and how this sort of really micromanaging, intensive parenting is something that scares a lot of people off of the idea of having kids, and also is really harmful to both kids and parents.
I can see that this parenting style, look, I know it's harming kids. I can imagine, therefore, that it's turning a lot of people off the prospect of having kids, because let's face it, there's so many people who in our lives who have young kids, and the entire ecosystem of that family revolves around that kid's food, that kid's naps, that kid's needs. And so if you try to interact with that couple, it's like, well, we can't. Used to be, you brought your kid with you, stick him in a backpack, put him in a front pack, put him in a little carrier, like have kids will travel. You know, I love that mindset. Like, I want a kid to join me on my journey. I want my kid to know everything we're about. So if we're hikers or campers or travelers, or we like to whatever, like we're going to take our kid with us, instead of our entire life has changed to pivot around keeping this kid on some schedule or in some cocoon that we think is necessary because some expert or our friend said. It looks like a nightmare from the outside. So the good news is it doesn't have to be that way. You know, you can parent in a completely different way. You know, it is more old fashioned. You know, we don't want to neglect our kids, but we do want them to have room to breathe and be, and to have autonomy and to play outside of our watchful eye, not, you know, miles away, you know, but in the next room where we're not hovering. Choose that. You can choose that. If you're yearning to have a kid and think parenting sucks, you know, go put yourself in community with people who aren't so stressed out of their minds and anxious and trying to curate their child's every moment. You know, band together, find each other, you know, reclaim a healthy adulthood, a healthy parenting style. Like, all of that is within your grasp and within your reach.
Okay, so we already talked about the sort of myth that if you have the right partner, that you're automatically going to want to have children. We also talked about another myth, which is the idea that having kids is some sort of guarantee of your future. And, you know, let me know if you haven't heard this one before. Hey, if you don't have kids, who's going to take care of you when you're old? And this idea that having kids is almost a kind of insurance that we need to take out for our futures. Well, I went straight to who I felt was one of the best sources on this topic, and that was a hospice nurse. I spoke with none other than Julie McFadden, hospice nurse Julie, which P.S., we talked about Julie's book, Nothing to Fear, which was about to come out, and very excited to share that it went New York Times bestseller. So one more reason for you to get a copy of Julie's book, Nothing to Fear. But Julie, as you hear from her in the episode and you learn, is, as mentioned, a hospice nurse. And so she has been there at the end for many, many people's end of lives, deaths. And we hear from her in episode 21, where I just had to know, I had to ask her, okay, Julie, if we're having kids, does that mean they're going to be there at the end? And if someone has kids, does that mean, they're going to be there? Is this something that we should be considering? Are there people who you've witnessed dying who feel loneliness and sadness and regret who have kids? Like, would you say, and do you ever hear stories about, like, I don't know, the kid who doesn't come to visit, or like being brokenhearted by your child? Like, do you, or is it always kind of like everybody's there, it's all happy?
Oh, no. I mean, family, people die how they live. So, like, it depends on who you are. You know, it depends on who you are. It depends on the kind of person you are. Like, not everyone's a great parent. So if you're not a great parent, your kids aren't going to be there. And even if you are a great parent, they still might not be there, because people aren't used to people aging. People aren't used to having to care for people. People aren't, like, the people don't want to be around it. So, I mean, the common thing I see is that no one has enough help. That's the common thing. Like, I mean, we'll probably get into this, but like, child or no child, you need to prepare for your own death.
Now, of course, it depends on the circumstances of our death. And when Julie and I are talking, we're talking about being able to anticipate our death because we're getting towards old age, or we are, you know, becoming unwell. We're not talking here about a premature death, like an accident or something like that. but we'll hear a little bit more from her about this in terms of maybe one or two of the things that you can do to think about this. Bearing in mind, as her and I talk about in the episode, this is going to look and be different depending on where you're living in the world, what sort of support you're going to have, from the government, from your place of employment, et cetera. Let's hear a bit more from Julie on this topic.
I know that might sound depressing, but that is what I would say to anyone, children or not. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter if you have children.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. You need to still be saving money to have paid caregivers.
And we also heard from someone else who I thought was just a perfect authority, if you will, to talk to what's going to happen when you're older. Is having kids going to help protect us? And on this front, this was really related to, sort of a financial perspective. We spoke with Jay Zigmont, who is a certified financial planner. And here's what Dr. Jay had to say. Are there like financial costs or pitfalls or disadvantages for somebody who chooses the child-free path?
The biggest issue is planning for long-term care. And I'll use the U.S. Census numbers. They looked at adults over 55, and they found childless adults, 2.5% of them got any financial support from their family. So that's like nothing. Now, the interesting thing is, in adults over 55 who are parents, 1.5% got any support from their family. So the truth is, nobody's getting financial support from their family when they're old.
Yeah.
Child-free folks, we just know we have to do it. Yeah. We have to have a plan for long-term care.
So as you've just heard from those two conversations, whether we like it or not, whether you ultimately have kids or stay child-free, we do have to be thinking about our own futures. We need to be thinking about long-term care. We need to be thinking about how we're going to get any additional support that we may need, where it comes to our health, our well-being, and so on and so forth. So I want to encourage you again, regardless of what you decide, make sure that you're speaking with the necessary people in your life to get a good plan in place for your older age. So something else that came up in these last 16 conversations is, what do we do when we are at odds with our partner on the kids or child-free topic? And I just want you to know, if you're grappling with this is very, very common. It's something I hear from a lot of clients. It's something that my various colleagues in the industry also see and hear about, which I'll tell you who we're going to hear from in a second, one of my colleagues. But what do we do if our partner wants kids and we don't, or if we're both ambivalent, or if one of us is leaning a different direction than the other? So who better to speak with on this topic than somebody who has been doing this work, who has been supporting couples and individuals in making the kids or child-free choice? None other than Merle Bombaderi, who is the author of the book, The Baby Decision, a must read if you are grappling with this decision, as well as a long time coach and therapist in the parenting decision-making space. Here's Merle.
Another thing that's really useful is to look at, what could I do to make my decision more acceptable to you? And for both people to do that. So let's say a woman wants to have a child, and assuming a straight couple, the man doesn't. Mm-hmm. We've been, our original idea was to have 3 kids. What if we talked about having just 1 kid, and instead of doing it in the next year or 2, what if we waited 5 years? And some of your questions about whether you want to have a child or not, could be met that way. So, those are some examples. And for someone who is trying to persuade their partner to be child-free, what are the things that you love most or that appeal to you most about having a child? And are there other ways that we can give that to you? So really trying to look at what the possibilities are.
If you've not already listened to episode 29 with Merle, she imparts so much wisdom from her last 45 plus years of having practiced in this space. And I promise you, if you were feeling stuck and at odds with your partner navigating this decision, this conversation will really hopefully help you just be a little bit more at peace and realize there is a way through for the two of you to have this discussion. Now, on this topic of navigating relationship odds, something that comes up is this feeling that, hey, my partner says they're happy with either decision. My partner says that they're really in support of having a child or being child-free. And I just want to have a little disclaimer here in terms of what I'm about to share. That is, specifically if you're having or thinking about having kids, I want to encourage you, especially if you're in a heterosexual partnership, if you're the woman, to make sure that you have full understanding of, hey, is this person, if they're saying they're happy to have kids, whatever, sounds good, whatever you want, making sure that person is coming to the table as far as planning for that future, making sure that you're going to be sharing an equitable workload, making sure that they're really fully understanding the depths of this decision. So I just want to say that first of all. And also, one thing that came up, and this came up in my conversation with my husband, Chris, is the fact that we also can only believe our partner when they say, I'm happy with your decision. I'm happy if you don't want to have kids. Especially if this person is ambivalent or was sort of, call it wishy-washy or undecided about what they wanted. It can be really sometimes scary to feel like we are bearing the brunt of the decision. And I want to add a second disclaimer, which is I think it's really important in our partnerships that we each do our individual work to connect with our desires. And as you heard from my husband, Chris, a little bit earlier in this episode, even though I was really needing to get clear on my own feelings because he was feeling quite 50-50, he also talks about on this solo retreat that he wanted to go away on his own and sort of come to terms with how he truly felt about either path. And I think that's really important to do. So I don't just want to say, hey, you should make the decision yourself. And if you have a relationship, a partner, that they can just go along for the ride. I want to make sure that I'm being clear and impressing the seriousness of this decision. I don't want to encourage any flippancy. And also, if your partner is saying, especially if you are somebody, and I see this and hear this a lot with women who are leaning or preferring to be child-free, if your partner says, I'm really happy to stay child-free, and you're thinking, oh God, I'm taking fatherhood away from them. That's a big one I hear from women. He would make a great dad. I'm taking this experience away. I want to emphasize, and you'll hear in the conversation with my husband and I, with Chris and I, that we need to also bear responsibility for our own ultimate actions and decisions. And we don't need to feel guilty or pressured or feel like we've taken anything from anyone, if they're saying, hey, this is okay. So I have a few minutes here. I just want to share this excerpt of this conversation with Chris and I, where we dialogue on this. I felt like if I decided I didn't want this, that I was going to be depriving you of being a dad and having kids. Because as you shared earlier in this episode, you were, first of all, just the person you are is the kind of person that would be a wonderful father, but you are great with children. I'll hold this infant. You're so natural in a way that I've seldom seen. And so I felt like I was going to be depriving the world of this amazing dad and I'm not really worried about our imaginary unborn children, but I hear this from other women. I've actually heard it from quite a few women who've said to me, I think my partner would be an amazing father in this case. And they worry about that. So what would you say to somebody who's feeling like that, who's like, oh, if I decide not to, I'm taking this away from my partner? Or what would you say to me, with that feeling?
Oh, and I'm not sure if I did, but probably I said, I need to make my decision and you need to make your decision. And if we both want it, then for us, that was our way to say okay, let's have a child. But I think, potentially I'd be an amazing dad. Sorry, now it gets maybe a little bit abstract, or I'm not sure if that comparison is. Maybe I'd be also an amazing Formula One driver.
Good choice, Chris. You don't even watch Formula One, but good example. It's he's going to say doctor or something.
but I'm not then, and so I hope, or I'm good in something else. And if it would really be this. And that would be obviously a total different situation. And other people might have that. Other couples might have that situation where the woman is ambivalent or doesn't want to, but the man really wants to. Although this situation I hear very seldom about, then one has to obviously find a path with that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's a good.
But my feelings weren't so strong that I would want to have a kid, that I had any reason for making you, I don't know, bring you into this position, or even worse, making you feel a little bad about it.
Yeah.
So I think I just gave you confidence that it's beautiful that you think that of me. And that's obviously a compliment, but no reason to be sad about.
Yeah. Well, and it's a good reminder that if we're in a relationship with someone, that our partner is their own person, and that at the end of the day, they're the ones who will make the decision or should be making the decision for themselves. And even in this case of a compromise, if somebody says, I wanted it, but my relationship with you is a higher priority and you've decided not to, and we're not going to do that, all we can do is trust and believe them. And it's not up to us if that person bears resentment. Like that's an issue that will be addressed, but like, it's not my responsibility to like every day be like, are you sure? Are you going to change your mind? Are you mad at me? Are you going to leave me and go like have a baby with somebody else? That may or may not happen, but it's like, again, that's not my responsibility. If you're saying to me, nope, I choose this, I choose you, I choose the relationship.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, once it's said, to always bring it up again is also not anything, I'd say, I don't know, attractive or nice then. If somebody is always like, would doubt it then. And obviously it's.
Yeah, I would say if that's something that's coming up, there's that persistent doubt, then it's something that probably should be addressed either in like individual or couples therapy, because I think it can become, it's similar like if you don't trust your partner for some reason. I mean, sometimes there's good reason not to trust your partner, but if it becomes almost like a poison in that relationship, I think it can derail it, where it's like, I was okay, but you continuously questioning me and questioning that I mean what I say, that's the bigger problem that I think would be at hand.
That's sort of what I meant.
Yeah. All right. Another takeaway from season 2 episodes is that if you are someone who has found themselves in a position where children are either not looking likely due to circumstance, let's say not having found a suitable partner, and you're someone who'd like to have had children with a partner, if you're someone who's struggling with fertility or reproductive issues, if you're somebody who's finding yourself at an age where you realize that perhaps this decision has sort of passed you by for various reasons, and you are struggling to make peace with the fact that you either probably won't have kids or that you definitely will not have children, I want to draw your attention to a beautiful conversation that I really hope you will have listened in full to. And if not, we'll encourage you to do so. And this was with Keltie Seppi. This was episode 26. And Keltie is our first guest that we had on who had wanted to have children and ultimately was unable to and had to make the tough decision to stop fertility treatment, which you hear about in the episode. And so what I want to share, the takeaway, and this is something I've heard not just from Keltie, but from other women in my network, is that although there can be a lot of grief and pain, and it can be very complicated, that you can make peace with a child-free or childless, if that's the term you prefer. You can make peace with a life without children, even if your preference would have been to have kids. Let's hear from Keltie on this one.
If somebody said to me right now, like I could snap my fingers and magically put like your baby in your arms right now, I would say no, because my life is not set up in a way that I want that anymore. A baby would not fit into my life anymore. So where does that leave me? Like I'm technically still childless, but I also don't want a baby.
Yeah.
Like I would say mindset wise right now, I feel much more child free because I'm super happy with the life that I have, but it's complicated, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think if I use a child free, a lot of people would say, no, you're childless. And I am, and I feel child free. And sometimes I feel childless. So I just feel like those two terms are really trying to put a lot of people in boxes that they're just not expansive enough. I think we need new language to have these conversations.
Okay, the last takeaway that I want to share with you from season 2, this is something that I just loved, this conversation. And this was with Amanda E. White of the Therapy for Women account on Instagram. And we spoke in episode 23. Now, Amanda, not only does she have incredible wisdom and experience as a therapist, but she is a former fence sitter. And I want to direct you to and encourage you to check out her Substack called Fence Sitter. She has some great articles on there, specifically from the perspective of someone who was on the fence, who has become a mom. Of course, I was also on the fence, but I've chosen the Childfree Path. So I really appreciate Amanda's perspective and what she's doing on that front. But I love what Amanda and I talk about here. And the takeaway is that the same thing that can make a child or children an affirmative yes for one person can make it a clear no for someone else. You'll understand more what I'm talking about when you hear this excerpt of my conversation with Amanda. This was a conversation we had in episode 23.
I love my dog so much. And I started thinking about how he's such a pain in the butt. Like this dog I have like a rescue dog who has like allergies and foot issues and just he doesn't like other dogs. He has so much work, but we love him so much and we love to do things with him that, you get to see him excited. And I started to think about how much joy I got from him. And I started thinking about, I think that's what people mean a bit with going to the zoo, even though you wouldn't like going to the zoo, but watching your child be excited about the zoo. That was a big thing that I think changed for me.
It's really interesting that you share that, because I have a dog as well. And on the flip side for me, and I share this not to say, well, you're wrong, but to show that I think is actually a really potentially powerful tool and exercise for someone to do, because I similarly, love my dog to death. Like, the memes where it's like you're crying because your dog died, but your dog hasn't died yet, but you're like, and it's like 2 years old or something. Our dog's 10 now, but I can't even think about it. I'm like, she's going to live to be like 18. Yeah. There are dogs that live to be that old. P.S. But for me, actually, I think what's interesting is because people talk about like in a certain age, kind of having that urge, and people, oh, my ovaries ache. And we'll I think have some future guests on to talk about this notion of course we have biology, and we do have biological clocks that pertain to like all kinds of things, feeling thirsty or tired. And I don't want to say that people's experiences that's not real. But there's obviously, of course, a lot of societal factors that play into that longing and what's happening around us. And so for me, interestingly, thinking about it now, our dog is 10, I'm 41. I got her in my early 30s. And it was really this, like, I wanted to have this dog. I wanted to have this creature, this being with me and my husband. And for us, of course, a couple can be a family, but I feel like our dog is what made us a family. Yeah. And it gave me enough of that it made me think, I love this, but I also don't want more as far as that like responsibility or even, the risk of loving, if you will. And I'm not ashamed to say that there's probably fear tied up in that. So interesting. I think there's probably some powerful questions people can explore there if they have a pet, to say, what's my relationship like with that animal? And how would I feel if I like took it up a notch, many notches?
Well, that's really what I love about this topic too, is the same thing can happen to people, or the same question, you can ask the same question and people have totally different responses. And to me, that is such like a clear indication that not everyone is meant to have kids.
Now, of course, in hindsight, I'm like, yeah, of course this is true. But it was just such an interesting sort of insightful aha moment for me to think, wow, one of the same things that helped sort of drive Amanda towards having a child is the same thing that pulled me away from wanting to have a child and pushed me towards the Childfree Path. So super interesting, and just goes to show that we are all such a unique makeup of our experiences, of our personality traits, of our upbringings. And all of those things uniquely combine to help create the desires that we have and the wants that we have in our lives. And of course, this is what can make this decision so complicated, but it's also what makes it really beautiful. All right, that is all for me for this wrap-up episode with my takeaways from season 2 of the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. Now, I am really curious to know, I would love for you to send me a DM over on Instagram, and you can find my Instagram handle in the show notes for today's episode if we're not already connected there. Send me a DM and let me know. I'm actually really interested. Which guest was your favorite in season 2? Was there a conversation that you felt specifically helped you, or a perspective that you were really happy to hear? And who would you like to hear from in season 3? Always looking for guest suggestions. It could be a specific person you want to hear from. It could also be a particular story or angle or perspective that you'd love to hear from. Again, I have a very long list of people that I'm planning to have on for the next season. But if we don't get who you'd like to hear from on for season 3, we'll definitely be hearing from them very soon. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. I so appreciate you. I am so thrilled, again, as I shared at the end of season 1, for all of the growth, all of the listens, all of the people's lives who this podcast has already touched. I just so very much love creating it for you, and I'm very grateful for you listening. So as I shared earlier in the episode, if you have not already left a review for the Kids Are Child-Free podcast, you are going to hear me talking about it, singing about it, shouting about it over the next couple of weeks over on Instagram. And that is, please leave a review or a rating. Again, you can do that on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. I will include the links to both of those streaming platforms in the link for today's show notes. All right, that is all from me. I wish you a beautiful day, and I will see you back here soon for the start of season 3 of the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. That'll be kicking off on the 11th of September. Okay, now that we've wrapped up today's conversation, this is the part of the episode where I tell you that you need to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. And you really need to do that. And I'm going to tell you why. And that is because one of the big ways that people find and discover new podcasts like this one is through reviews. So if you yourself can go say what you loved about this podcast, why people who are on the fence should tune into the Kids Are Child-Free podcast, that's going to help other people who are also wondering, should I have kids or stay child-free, to discover us. Thank you in advance for doing so. I will be featuring some of the reviews in upcoming episodes, so maybe I'll share yours. You never know. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you back here soon for our next episode.